Today's episode is brought to you by Hustler. I'm really honored that they've come on to support the podcast because I've actually been using Hustlers for almost 10 years now myself. They're some of the most reliable machines that I've ever used in my business. More about them later in the podcast. Hustler, here to work. All right, welcome to today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. We have a very special episode with Daniel from Nature Build or Nature Build Insta, who does some of the coolest, I'm just getting them on the screen now, some of the coolest water features, ponds, ecosystems. You can even maybe occasionally swim in them if you want to, race a fish if you feel so inclined. But welcome to the podcast, Daniel. Can you give a proper explanation of what you actually do? And again, people, it's Nature Build Insta. Check out the photos yourself. But what is your actual job? What do you call yourself? And if people are just listening to this, how do you describe the work that you do?
Hey, mate. Thanks for having us. We are pond builders, but I think ponds have evolved a lot over the years. So we specialise in ecosystem ponds, natural waterfalls, heavy timber work, stuff like that. So, and when I started, a decade ago, I didn't like ponds. I thought ponds were ugly concrete holes in the ground that were just full of algae and didn't look natural. Obviously, what I've come to learn from using the aquascape methodology and working with, fantastic artists of the year and everything else is that it can look like, natural streams and natural waterways that I grew up swimming in and walking around and stuff like that, which is where my real passion lies. So the best way to describe it is that we're trying to mimic nature, really. As Greg Wittstock says, we're working with Mother Nature, not against it. We're trying to create ecosystems. We're trying to, create things that aesthetically mimic nature and that are just, beautiful and help you relax and, lower your cortisol levels and just cool places to hang out. And that's what I love building. I've always been a very passionate person about everything I've done. And this is absolutely no different. I do it because I love it and I still get excited about every project that we build and love doing it.
Well, that's what I love about what you do too, because I would agree that if someone came to me and said, I want a pond in my backyard, I would think of either a fiberglass or plastic black thing someone bought from, a hardware store.
Yeah.
They chuck a hole in the ground and they throw some goldfish in it and some mesh on top and that's it. And then it's like, why would you want that? I don't, now if you get some water features, maybe the sound is cool, but then I look at your stuff, and I'm scrolling through it now. It looks like you've literally built a house around maybe a natural creek or something that's actually was there originally, rather than something that's you're trying to make something. Yeah, you get what I mean. It works. It just looks natural. It looks like you already had that, and you just lucked out and bought a block of land that had it on there, and that's really cool. But then when you start talking about the animals and all the other stuff you do, that's quite special. I like it, So how did you get into doing this? Because if you didn't like ponds to start with, and now you're doing some of the best stuff out there, where does that start?
Well, it started with me being really sick, actually. So I was stuck at home in bed, and I was actually at a YouTuber called Stanley Dirt Monkey Genetic. Who I followed and was quite interested in, and he did a video going to the Aquascape headquarters and seeing what the Aquascape Builder Pond Day was about and everything else, going back about 10 years ago or so ago. And I just opened my eyes and I went, oh wow, this is what I think this should be water features. This is what this is what I think when I think of creeks and dams and water features and waterfalls and stuff like that. The stuff that I've sort of grown up, going hunting for, looking for waterfalls and stuff like that. This is what this was. So it sort of changed my perspective altogether. And then you pair that with my personality, which is very much a jump out of the plane and build a parachute on the way down sort of personality. So I just went, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. I was already doing, some landscaping and heavy timber work, but this is sort of has become my niche since, because I just really threw myself into it. And I think the first year I flew over to Chicago. I went to Pondemonium, which is their big conference for all pond builders, and listened to all these fantastic Ed Ballou and Brian Helfrich and Greg and all these guys who are so passionate and so talented about pond building. Listened to them speak. I met hundreds of other great pond builders as well, and just fully submerged myself in pond building. Practice, there's no replacement for repetition. Working alongside Patrick Handley was fantastic. Working alongside Ben Harris was fantastic. Just really throwing myself into situations where I could use my work ethic and the theoretical knowledge that I had to really benefit other businesses, and in turn, give me more practical knowledge and learn more from other great guys in the industry, until I could hone my craft to a point where I felt comfortable sort of pushing my own boundaries and learning, self-sufficiently.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right ahead in the story because you talk about going to, by the way, Pondemoniums are great. That's a great name.
Yeah.
Props to whoever came up with that.
That would be a Greg Whitstockism, I reckon. It's very much his style.
Well, it's not the only time you went to America because the first time I heard of you was through Sammy from Herb Your Enthusiasm, the podcast, which you've been a guest on. And he told me that there's a guy in Australia who built a pond for Shaquille O'Neal. And I was like, really? Like, that's pretty cool. You must be pretty good. Well, I mean, one, for Shaquille O'Neal to have you as part of the team, amazing. But secondly, you're in Australia, so like people must really like your work to fly you over. But we're going to talk about later, what your first pond was like and how do you even get started in this industry. And, I even want to know like what the nitty gritty is, but like, let's just fast forward to what was that experience like? When did you get the call? Was it on a tight time basis? Did you have to smash it out? Was it the best project, the worst project? Tell us all about this story.
Well, the first thing I'll say is it all goes full circle back to what I was saying earlier. We're developing those relationships with Patrick Handley from Waterscapes Australia, who is the Aquascape Australia importer. I developed a fantastic relationship with him, helping him at Lake Gula, and really sort of immersing myself in that project and trying to be as helpful and as beneficial to his business as I possibly could be. Then because of that, we developed a mutual friendship and respect, and he liked my work as well and my work ethic. So when the opportunity came up to build a project at Shaquille O'Neal's house, and Greg Whitstock invited some of the Aquascape Artists of the Year and stuff like that, he asked Patrick to put a team together, being the Artist of the Year and the representation for Australia. So we went over there with Patrick and a couple of his guys, Caleb and Kai, who are subcontractors for Patrick, but also own their own businesses, and then myself as well. So 3 Queensland guys and me as the Victorian fella went over there, and it was amazing. It was really amazing. It was a lot of hard work, long days, but it was fantastic. It was one of a kind experience. It was fantastic going over and hanging out with the other pond builders. We were sharing rooms with the Canadian guys over there, Fontana, who are great guys, and we were working with lots of other artists of the year. And so it was really great. Everyone just knew what to do. Everyone was quick to jump on a shovel. Everyone was, quick to sort of jump in wherever they were needed. There's no, Ed Ballou ran the whole project, but there's really no, major hierarchy. So there's no quabbles over things, and everyone just knows what they're doing and gets in and does it. So, and it was really fantastic. We started early in the morning. A lot of the time we had dinner still on site. So we were, but we finished that project start to finish in 5 days, so, which is pretty amazing given the scale and the size. So it was a cool experience.
Well, I'll tell people, I'm going to put a link to your YouTube video that you made on it in the description. What I'd like to say, if I was making a pond for Shaquille O'Neal, I'd be very nervous that by the time he rocked up, it didn't just look like a large puddle. You know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden everything gets dwarfed because he's there. But what was he like? I see a picture with you with him. Was he really happy about it? Was he a bit like, I'm too cool for school? Or I don't get that impression from him, but what was he like in person?
Yeah, look, he is genuinely the character you see on TV, really. He was obviously busy. Everyone wanted to get a photo, and everyone wanted to say hello, and everyone wanted to meet him. So he's got to spread himself out accordingly. And obviously, Greg wanted to do some filming and stuff as well with Aquascape. So, he was a busy fella running around. I spoke to his cousins a fair bit because they were a little bit less in the spotlight. So I had a good chat with them, who they come down to Australia quite often as well.
Yep.
But yeah, he was a genuinely really nice guy, and we got to, and we had a bit of a handshake, he unprompted did the Aussie, 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 oi, 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 which we made for a great video, obviously. But that's just Shaq's personality too. He loves a bit of banter and loves a laugh, and that definitely comes through when you meet him as well.
Okay, so how do you get from not liking ponds at all, right, and thinking they're lame? What is the progression like? What was it like building your first pond? Like, you told me that you jump out of the plane, build the parachute after, right? So did you watch that first video and just start digging a hole in your backyard and going, okay, there's a pond going here now? Like, how did it go? How those first steps go?
Look, not far off, to be honest. As I said, that first year I went to Chicago, went to Aquascape headquarters. Was lucky enough to be part of the rookie foreman build over there, which is like a fun little competition where rookie foremans all build in a team. We were lucky enough to win it in our first year, which was pretty cool. And I came back from that just with so much energy that I was just like, this is what I'm doing. Like it really cemented for me that I wanted to do this, moving forward, and this is where I wanted to niche into. And so, I just really threw myself into it. So I started, putting some advertisements up on Facebook Marketplace and, all that sort of stuff. And a lovely lady who I still see to this day, Ruth, she said, oh, yeah, I'd love you to build me a pond. And I went out there and I spoke to her about it, and I had no idea what I was doing, really. Like, it's, I knew the theoretical aspect of it, but there's so many unknowns that I just didn't know. We're in Metcalfe, so it's the rockiest place on earth. And I just, the first time trying to dig a pond, and I hit absolute rock reef about 300 mil down. So then I was having to build up, and I was collecting rocks off the property, and it was a really thrown in the deep end sort of learning experience for me. But that's how I sort of learn as well. So it was great. She loves it. She still loves it to this day. We still go and do maintenance on it occasionally, and give it a clean out and check the filters and do any stuff that we need to do. And she still loves it just as much as when we put it in. Now, from an aesthetic standpoint, I've certainly evolved since then. I look at the things that I did, and I didn't allow myself enough liner, so I was trying to pinch in the falls really tight, and I didn't really know how to set rocks properly, and I don't think I even had a hook on the excavator to sling it, so I was trying to hang it off the end of a digging attachment, like a hook, a ripper tooth, sorry, and just all sorts of things that I would never do these days, but that's how you learn. So, and Gabriel, who's with me, he's come back with me working with Nature Build. He was there on my first pond build as well, a decade ago, 12 years ago or something. And he had to drive the excavator for me because I'd never driven an excavator before. So, flash forward now, and I'm driving 20 tonners and 25 tonners, and I'm on excavators every day of the week pretty much. But, at the time, I just, I threw myself in the deep end, and that was how I sort of went about it. And then that one project, I took as many photos as I possibly could from different angles, and of the waterfalls and of the fish and of the water plants and of the side of the rocks and of the plantings and everything else, and then used that to market ponds and water features on Facebook, and until eventually I started to get more and more ponds. And again, spoke to Greg Whitstock and said, look, mate, what do I do here? How do I do this? And he said, look, you put one pond in, and one pond becomes two ponds become four ponds become 8, and so on and so forth. And it was 100% correct. It's the more I put in the ground and the more photos I got, the more people reached out and wanted something cool, and I got to sort of continue exploring that passion and figure out how to do what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, and what sort of made things my own and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was really cool.
If you've been thinking about getting to ride-on mowing this season, or you want to upgrade the ride-on mower you currently have a look at the Hustler range. Like I said before, I've been using them for almost 10 years now, and I can honestly say they are some of the most versatile and reliable machines I have ever used. One of the things about hustlers is you can use them on overgrown jobs, and I did a lot of those in the early days, but take that same mower and put it on a highly manicured lawn and it still does a really good job. Hustlers have a great range all the way from the 34-inch Dash to the Super 104, which is a 104-inch wide mower. Add to that the Raptor range, Fast Track, X1, Super Z, Super S, and the Hustler likely have a mower that suits your budget and your goals. In addition, Hustler have 130 plus dealers across the country, which means heaven forbid, if something were to go wrong, that help is not far away. And that is crucial if you're relying on that machine for your income. I'm really honored that Hustler have come on board to support the podcast because it's a brand I truly believe in. If you want to get into ride mowing this season, like I said, check out the range. Thank you, Hustler, for support. Hustler, here to work.
Be honest, how many times have you been tempted to just go get some dynamite, put it in the hole, set it on fire, run away quickly, job's done. You know what I mean? Put some lighter down, fill it with water, see you later. Like I'm sure there's plenty of jobs you'd be like, man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. Oh, look, I'm pretty emotionally connected to all my projects. So I'm, almost to a detriment sometimes, I think, where I just want it to be the absolute best it can be. And I want to, so sometimes, but there's been times where I just, projects have just gone pear-shaped or I've, it's taken twice as long, or we've hit a heap of rock and I've got, jackhammers and excavators with hydraulic hammers, and I just can't get down enough, and that's all part of the process, and with that you start learning how to best adapt as well. So there's times where I've hit big rocks in there and I say, cool, I'm going to put a nice little shelf there, and I'm going to move the pond slightly to the side, and I'm going to create a really nice shelf that'll create a planting area for water lilies and stuff where that big rock is in my way. So, I suppose I used my approach of being organic to try to, not get so caught up on the fact that, well, I said it was going to be exactly here, so I've got to keep it exactly here, and sort of made some changes accordingly. And generally you end up with a better product at the end of it because you change the viewing angle of it, or people go, oh, I love that. Why, and I worked with another guy, a Mauritian guy who was named Zon Lucchesi, and he used to say, if you can't fix it, feature it. And I've sort of carried that with me, throughout my career, your stuff where you can't go, oh, well, I can't get that beam out of the way. So instead I'll build this really beautiful sort of timber surroundings and I'll make it this really beautiful feature beam. And it's often what makes the project spectacular is the thing that you thought was going to be the biggest issue. So I've tried to carry that moving forward in my career as well.
My business mind is hearing this going, how do you even quote for this? Like, do you just go, like, people, this is my price, and if we hit something, you're paying, and don't complain to me, it wasn't my fault. Or do you have to just go, I'm going to wear it? Like how do you, because I can imagine you start digging and you have no idea. And sometimes it's like, it's so much easier than you think, and sometimes you literally can't do anything. So do you, is it fixed price? Is it certain things in the contract? How do you work around this?
Oh, I will tell you, rarely is it easier than I think.
Great. You're doing a very good job of making people want to get into this industry, I tell you what.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic industry, and I would recommend it to anyone who's passionate about it. But at the end of the day, I've probably worn a lot more of those than I should. I've never said that I was a businessman. I'm a pond builder. I'm passionate about it. There's a lot of aspects in my business world that I go, geez, I need to adjust what I'm doing there, because I want to keep customers happy. I want to do the best job possible. And sometimes that means I put in extra pumps and more material and worn the costs of excavation and everything else, where I've lost money on projects, that were quite substantially, sized. And from a business standpoint, that's not sustainable. So I'm aware of that, but it's also, it's part of that sort of, it's part of that learning process as well. I think, I really focused on learning to be the best pond builder I could be, and develop great relationships, and develop a reputation, and develop a sort of social media following and all that sort of stuff in the early days. And now I sort of think I'm coming full circle, where I'm starting to develop how to be a pond building business a little bit as well. So, that's all sort of learning. And I do have clauses in there to say we obviously, we do a fixed price quote. There won't be any changes on that unless we hit rock or something like that. So we can't see what's underground. We can quote based on what we know the conditions of the area is like, or what other experiences you've had when you've had other contractors there digging and stuff like that, and we can make allowances for that. But generally, we try to keep pretty stuck to our quotes. Because I personally don't like when people tell you one thing and then go, "Oh, well, that didn't include filtration. If you want that, that'll be another $20,000." So I try to be as transparent and as upfront as everything I can. But I also have conversations with people. I say, "Look, we've hit this rock. It's going to take a little bit longer. We're going to need a hammer, or whatever the process is." And we have a upfront conversation with the client and give them some ballpark costs. Generally, they're okay with that, but I always like to sort of have that conversation before we proceed.
So, okay, getting into the technical stuff, because I deliberately haven't really looked into what it takes to build a pond, because I want to learn with everybody coming along for the ride.
Yeah.
I've seen some pretty atrocious concrete things. I know that there's some plastic or fiberglass stuff out there. You're talking about liner. Why would somebody pick one over the other? Are there other options out there? Is it like one's clearly the best, everything else sucks, or is it horses for courses?
Oh, it's a little bit of a look. I love using EDPM liner personally. You can cold seam it together, so you can join pieces of liner together. You can add on pieces for waterfalls. You can add on little tributary streams. It's quite strong. It's quite stretchy. We use geotextile underneath it and over the top of it generally to protect it. But once that big rock goes on top of it, it's quite strong and will stretch with that rock. So it doesn't tear or it sort of keeps its shape. Part of the reason that I love EDPM. Concrete, I've always been of the theory that there's two kinds of concrete that's cracked and concrete that's going to crack. And that's, generally with water features, that's the way it is as well. At some stage down the line, you will get a hairline fracture in it. There'll be some movement in the soil and it may be perfectly built, but you will get a little hairline crack and water finds a way. Water is very good at finding its way through where it wants to go. And then all of a sudden that becomes a process of, draining and resealing and everything else. And it's harder to do. So I also find it doesn't look as natural. You can put rocks around the top edge, but it's difficult to sort of create the shelving. But it's not to say that we don't do, I've got a project that I quoted that's a recreation pond with natural rockwork and pebbles, but I'm actually doing pebblecrete flooring in it. So it's a concrete pebblecrete floor over the top of the EDPM liner. So there's definitely uses for it. There's people that do block work and concrete work inside of the pond liner and stuff like that. Just from a waterproofing membrane standpoint, I find EDPM to be the best.
Okay, so if I'm going to build a pond at home, right, and obviously you couldn't teach me in the next 30 seconds, but is it literally as simple as I'm going to dig a hole, I'm going to get some liner, I'm going to make it the shape I want to, and then I put it down? Or is there certain types of things that you need to be looking for? Like you need a certain type of soil underneath anyway, or you definitely can't have these kind of rocks because they're going to poke holes in it? Or like, what are the basics of building that people like me who don't know very little about this have never considered before?
Well, everything's as simple as it looks until you go to do it. Concreting looks simple, but I can guarantee if you have to go out and screed a 100 square meter slab and everything else, you'll discover real quick there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know. But watching people that know what they're doing, it looks quite easy. Pond building is no exception to that. It is in premise, it's dig a hole, put a liner in it, add filtration, add rock work, you've got a pond. But knowing the levels, knowing the aesthetics, knowing the way to shape the pond, knowing how to, making sure you put hydrostatic drains underneath them so that they don't push water up under the liner and end up with big water bubbles underneath it. knowing how to edge dress properly, knowing how to look for folds in your edges on your waterfalls so that you don't create low points for where reticulating water is going to spill out and you'll end up with a drained pond in a day. Knowing not to use certain types of rock because they will alter the pH balances of the water and, all that sort of stuff, and knowing how to properly backfill with pebbles and chalk rock and everything else so that you create structurally stable walls and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of, in theory it's easy, but there's a lot of incidentals and a lot of little bits and pieces that you learn along the way that is the difference between, a good pond build and a not so good pond build.
Do you get it often where somebody's had a crack themselves, right? Thought it was easy, and then they call you to fix it, and they're like, "Here's a low budget," because they still think it's easy. They got it wrong. They tried it. They still think it's easy, and they go to you, and you're just like, "Mate, we literally have to rip the whole thing up, or this is just completely backwards." Is that common?
Yes.
All the time.
Yeah, it is. It is common, and it's also common to think people go, "Well, I've already dug the hole, so it's for sure got to be cheaper." So it is, in theory, harder to start from an already dug hole because I haven't got any shelves in there. You haven't put hydrostatic drains in there. I can't reach one side of it now. I haven't done, it hasn't been shelved out properly. You've got a pile of rocks on a liner in there. So now I've got to go in and take all the rocks out and try to pull the liner out. Then they're saying, well, can't we just reuse the same liner? Well, no, I've got a pile of rocks on top of it and I didn't put it in. So I don't know if it's got holes in it. And, it can be a really tedious task trying to fix other people's work, other DIYers' work or other contractors' work even. It can be a very hard thing to do, and often in an ideal world I wouldn't do it. But at the end of the day, I try to keep customers happy and I try to give people the best experience within our industry. So if I can help them, then I will generally do everything I can to try to fit what I can within their budget and and within their sort of what they have available. But sometimes that's not doable either. So I try to have honest conversations with people and explain what it will cost to add proper filtration or what will need to happen. And sometimes that doesn't work, but most of the time people are appreciative of me being candid about it and explaining what needs to happen for it to work properly.
All right, let's talk about recreational ponds because you mentioned that briefly before, but this is. Well, I'll try and explain it for you. I've seen people do these where they make this what is essentially the size of a pool, and you can swim in it, but it's a pond. And you were saying before that when you're making them, what you're making is a pond that you can swim in, not a swimming pool that looks like a pond. But tell me about that because that seems like, for me, like I couldn't imagine anything better to have in the backyard than your literal own watering hole to go dip in at the end of the day. So is that really popular? I'm sure it's really expensive, so maybe only for people with a certain amount of budget. What's the process with that? What's the difference with that? Is it different? Is it all the same? Can you just put the liner at the bottom? Does that have to be concrete? Let's start exploring this world of recreational ponds.
Yeah, so recreation ponds are popular. They seem to go through little trends as well. For my business personally. Sometimes, I'll get heaps and heaps of recreation pond inquiries, and other times it's mostly aesthetic features, small fish ponds, waterfalls, and I won't get much inquiry at all about recreation ponds. But, I think I've got 4 on the books for this year. Of recreation ponds, which including some really cool sort of, ones with big long beach areas that are going to have sort of cantilever decks over the top of them and stuff. So looking forward to that. And again, in theory, it's the same as an ecosystem pond. But the difference is obviously when you start going deeper, you have to be really sure about your not just aesthetic rock work, about your structural rock work, making sure that you're back blocking, chalking, backfilling with pebbles, got a little bit of a grade backwards, all that sort of stuff to make sure that those rocks are stable. Obviously, you're going to have a hydrostatic drain in it, the same as we do with all of our ponds, but more important even on a recreation pond to have a hydrostatic drain that can push water out from underneath it if it does get water going underneath the liner, because obviously that water's going to want to go somewhere, so we're giving it an easier path to get out, usually via an ag drain that comes out lower than the top of the water level. And then when you talk filtration and stuff, we then, we have a biofalls in a smaller pond. Once we start getting up to recreation-sized ponds and larger ponds, we switch to a wetland filtration system. So that's a custom-built filtration system that consists of a centipede and a snorkel, which are basically a well-designed pipe that slows the water velocity down. And then that goes up through aqua blocks, which are a structural void block, and again slow the water velocity down. And then they go up through different grades of pebbles and cobbles to grow beneficial bacteria in. And then once it gets to the top of that wetland, that's full of water plants, which helps polish the water and also become a perennial water garden. Now, as far as on the other side of it, the intake bay side of it, when we build smaller ponds, we'll have a skimmer system, which is like a mechanical filtration skimmer. When we start getting up to larger, well, even large ponds, and there is recreation pond kits and stuff like that that have filters skimmer baskets on them. I personally don't use them. Anytime I go up to a recreation pond, I will do an intake bay, which is basically a little cove where all that water pools into, and it has a pump vault down underneath it, and that's where that water draws across. So any leaf debris or anything like that goes into that little skim cove or a negative edge waterfall. And then sometimes some larger projects, I will put a skimmer inside that cove as well, just to catch leaf debris that you can pull out and stuff. But it's sort of a systemed approach then. Jet lines, we put jet lines in all our recreation ponds. We want water movement, so we'll run pipe work in through the back of the rock work with jet lines coming through it to move that body of water around and try to cool the water, keep the water cool for algae growth, and also just move the body of water around as well. So we want as much sort of stuff mixing that up so debris comes to the top, floats across to the intake bay, then it is pulled from the intake bay back up to the wetland filtration where that beneficial bacteria grows. So that's the basic overview of it anyway.
So you're filtering without, well, the water needs to be a certain quality, and you're not using chemicals to do that. You're mentioning bacteria. What else? Is there anything else? Is that all you need? Or like, how do you keep the water good, healthy for something to potentially jump in when you're not throwing pool salt and chlorine in all the time?
Yeah, so, it's non-chlorinated. So, which, most swimming bodies of water have never been chlorinated up until, not that long ago. But basically it's mimicking a creek system. So Ed Ballou, who helped develop the project, has studied a lot in limnology, I believe it is, which is the study of freshwater ecosystems. And basically what's happening is it's mimicking a stream system. So all that beneficial bacteria grows within the wetland filter. And that is what makes that water healthy, is that all that beneficial bacteria in there, that it's outcompeting the negative bacteria. So there is still risks with natural water, as with any sort of swimming in beaches and watering holes and waterfalls and everything else. But having that constant circulation, good aeration, and a larger beneficial bacteria zone. They did a lot of testing on Lake Gula, so which was a project that I helped Patrick Handley with from Waterscapes Australia, and that was a 100 by 50 metre recreation lake, 5 metres deep, and that has a large amount of people swimming over the Woodford Folk Festival, and they did substantial water quality tests all the way through that. And the way that the wetland filtration system coped with that over the festival was just incredible. Water quality higher than what they deem for your natural swimming, and water quality higher than what they deem for most drinking water. So, so those wetland filtration systems do a fantastic job. Obviously, they're going to vary. There was times where it was hot and there was lots of bird life and lots of people, and those levels got up high. And then by that next afternoon, by that next morning, all those levels were crystal clear again. So that's part of that ecosystem. So it's beneficial bacteria.
How big was that? Say that again. How big that was?
Roughly, it was 100 metres by 50 metres by 5 metres deep.
Which is like 4 Olympic swimming pools? Something like that?
Pretty large.
That's enormous. Yeah. That's huge. And so And how many people are swimming in that? That's pretty crazy. How many
Pat,
people swimming in it?
Pat would know the answer to that better than I would. But I think is over the Woodford Folk Festival weekend, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people go through that swimming daily and everything else. So so the exact numbers Pat would know or Woodford would know better than I do. I was just helping build it. I didn't do a lot of the follow-up sort of stuff on the festival and how many people went through and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was quite a large amount of people go to the festival yearly, and they have done sort of consistent water quality tests on that for several years to sort of keep seeing how it's all establishing and maturing and everything else, which was really interesting from our perspective as well.
So do you need, or does it help to have certain types of plants or certain types of fish or frogs or anything else? Would that help with water quality? Or are there other ones that would hurt with water quality that bring in the negative bacteria?
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of people go, I don't know if I want fish, but fish are sort of part of that natural ecosystem. As I said to you earlier, it may have been off camera. What we build are recreation ponds. So they're aesthetic. You've got a perennial water garden. You've got waterfalls. You've got this. You've got a habitat for fish, and you've got drinking water for wildlife, and you've got availability for fire. Water on hand and everything else. All these, fantastic other parts of it, other than just being able to jump in it and have a dip every now and again like a conventional pool. So for me, I think having fish is a whole part of that ecosystem. There's definitely different plants do different jobs, obviously. Some are better at filtering, some are better at oxygenating, some aesthetically look good, some are good at growing. You can grow Vietnamese mint in them and stuff like that as well. You can do a lot of, grow a lot of edible plants and herbs and stuff in them. And then there's different kinds of fish. Obviously, like most things, it's a natural ecosystem. So you are still going to get algal blooms, and you're still going to it's going to take some time to mature. Generally, we say, 2 to 3 seasons, and it starts reaching full maturity, where you'll get a lot less algae blooms and a lot more sort of stable ecosystem because that beneficial bacteria has really grown in. And then different, obviously just the nutrient load. So fish are converting nitrites, nitrites and nitrates, but they're also adding waste load as well. So there's a thing of having enough fish to be beneficial for the ecosystem, but obviously if you've got a small pond with hundreds of fish in it, well, it's going to be detrimental because they're creating more waste than they're fixing. So it's like anything, it's creating balance, and that's what the ecosystem approach is. It's sort of what happens naturally in aquariums and stuff like that. If you overstock it, the fish stress out, disease goes through, fish die, the level balances, fish become happy again. It's part of that ecosystem approach is creating that balance by having, not having too much pump flow and not having too many fish and not having, all these things that can be detrimental to the system as well.
Can you put massive water features on them? Because I'm assuming that would have negative or positive effects, having water flowing and things like that, and people would want them for the aesthetics. Yeah. Does that create issues?
So it doesn't so much create issues as far as I usually split them up into a couple of systems generally, depending on what it is. So our Keilor project had 30 linear meters of waterfalls and then went to a 5 by 7 meter fish pond. And then that went into a negative edge over to a basin at the bottom level. So if I was going to have all that water running over all those waterfalls into the pond and then that water running over the top, if that system got turned off, there would be such a huge amount of water in motion that we would have to account for in that basin. We would either have to have that basin just absolutely ginormous, or it's going to overflow and it's going to go down the stormwater drain because we put overflows on them. It's going to go down the stormwater drain and it's going to get rid of half your water, and then you turn the system back on and your pumps are going to run dry because you don't. So it's stuff like that you think of more than the water flow. Smaller ponds generally either have smaller waterfalls or they are two different systems.
Yep.
So or you have a larger reservoir, or sometimes you split that and have a reservoir in the middle and a reservoir on the end.
So, how do you this water? I'm assuming most of it is coming from mains water supply. Maybe some people from a bore. Does that cause problems? Because there's going to be some level of chlorine and chemical in treated mains water, and you might have like really weird pH coming from a bore, or is it usually all pretty fine?
So generally, larger pond systems and stuff, we will bring in a water truck to fill them initially. So that's fine. Obviously, rainwater is the best. It's going to be have positive nutrients in it and not a lot of no chlorine or anything like that in it. Now, town water, if we're doing a water change or a clean out or something like that, we'll treat the pond with a detoxifier so that gets rid of the chlorine and levels that out. But as far as just filling for splash and evaporative loss and stuff like that, it doesn't affect it. It's such a small amount going into a large body of water that it dilutes pretty well. So it's and they've all got beneficial bacteria and stuff in them as well. But so generally, if it's just for top up, it's not as much of an issue because we've got a large body of water and we're only putting a small amount topped up from evaporative loss and splash. If you're filling it up initially, then you may, from a bore, you may get some high levels where you get a lot more algae blooms and stuff initially. But as that becomes a stable body of water and the beneficial bacteria starts colonizing, then that will start leveling out, and then it will just be the top up that you've got to deal with.
So there's a lot of technical stuff that we're learning about here, right? And I'm sure that a lot of people come to you. They're just like me, and they don't really know anything about this, but they have an idea, and maybe they're not very movable from that idea. But if you're honest, the idea is dumb. And you've got to come as an expert and go, respectfully, this is not a very good idea. Is that really common that you've really just, like, at some point you might have to walk away, or like, do people just come and they go, I want this completely ridiculous thing. I want, crocodiles and massive water features and 6,000 frogs of this specific variety, and I want to swim in it every single day. And you've got to go walk this sort of tightrope between the client's expectation and what actually can be done.
Yeah, I've been very lucky as far as the clients that I have generally find me and already know my work and like my work and everything else. So they're calling me because they want a feature like what we build. Yes. So that makes that a lot easier because it's already we're setting the expectations off our own work. So obviously that is easier. And then we do have some clients that say, well, I want to do this and this and this, and it's crazy. And sometimes I go, cool, I can do crazy. Like, let's do it. Like it's, I've built waterfalls for an existing shipping container villas on a very steep slope, and I had to crane the rocks in one at a time and build them around these walkways and stairways, and I had to take rocks down on trolleys and everything else, but you get it figured out, and so I don't mind a challenge, but there is some things where I go, look, that's just not the way we do it, and if they are uncompromising and they say, well, that's the way I want it done, I say, well, we're not the company for you, Yeah. At the end of the day, I stake my reputation on the jobs that we do. So it has to be something that I'm happy to present and happy that I'm somebody comes over to your house and they say, oh, who built this? Nature Build built it and it's crap. Well, then I don't want my name attached to that. So then in those situations, sometimes I have to unfortunately say that I'm not the best person for them, and they'll either begrudgingly accept that, or they will say, okay, well, hang on, let's have a conversation and see if we can meet halfway somewhere where you're happy and I'm happy.
Yeah.
And then generally we have that conversation, and most of the time we can work out something that aesthetically or financially works for them, and also works from a standpoint of working properly and being to the standard that we expect.
So what is the most challenging project you've done where, like you said before, someone's come to you and they've got some crazy ideas, but you actually get excited about it and you're like, yeah, let's take on this amazing challenge?
Yeah, Keilor was pretty challenging. The project we did in Keilor won Pondless Waterfall of the Year through Aquascape in 2023, I think it was. I'm not sure. I've got the award somewhere there. But it was fantastic, and people that I did the pond tour this year, and a lot of people came out, and everyone that came to it just went, "Oh my God, this is so insane! Like it's just bigger and more impressive than anything I've ever seen." And it was, but it was tough. It was tough. It was bad access. It was in Keilor down a court, so I was having to get single tandems of rock delivered, track everything up one at a time with an excavator, take bulker bags of soil up there. I had excavators sliding backwards down a hill. I had lots of rock. I had very minimal space. I had to work my way from the top right-hand corner all the way backwards out, sort of winding my way down a hill and trying to join liner in between. And it was a very challenging project. Now, it looks amazing, and it's a pretty incredible scale and everything else, but it is definitely one of those projects that tested my resolve and my fortitude, I suppose, to see whether I could, because we would get there and it's getting major renovations done at the same time. It was a 3 to 4 story house that was getting major renovations done at the time, so I would show up and there would be scaffolding set up all along my access. And I had machines up there that I couldn't bring in or out anymore because I had, scaffold set up there and or people in the way or, things, costing more because they had to be brought up in bulker bags where I thought I was going to be able to dump out on the road, but there's no access anymore. And, so there was challenges, but that's you learn from that. And you go, okay, well, I need to expect the unexpected sometimes, and I need to think about the things that can potentially, change or go wrong or, create alterations, and I've got to learn to have those conversations with the client earlier. But at the same time, it came up amazing, and Kim, the client, was very trusting as far as just said, well, you're the expert, you do what you think. And we said, oh, okay, well, we can do this and this and this. And he was like, okay, great, send me a quote and yep, can we do it? No worries. He was great, but there was a lot of learning involved in that. So it's, they can definitely, some of those incredible projects can be quite challenging and sometimes lose money as well, whereas often doing a small little residential, 3 by 4 meter pond kit will look gorgeous. And you're in and out there pretty quick, and from business aspect you've done well, and from a client happiness aspect you've done well, and everything goes great. But like most of us in egos, we hang our hats on the things that are the most difficult to do. And I'm certainly no exception.
I have these conversations with people in business all the time where they message me, because we do work at a private school, right? So in the maintenance side of the industry, people who do mowing, they think, oh, private schools would be amazing. It's like, no, the one that we have is good, but a lot of them, it's just so hard to quote, and you're working around kids, and there's all these things that happen, and at school holidays, there's always 75 contractors all getting stuff done, and everyone's in the way, and you have this idea, and I think it's the same in every industry. I'm just using this as one example, where certain contracts, you think, oh, I'd love to have a retirement village, or I'd love to have a council contract of $100,000 a year. I'd love to do this, and then you realise, the $50 mowing jobs that I'm in and out in 5 minutes, they're actually pretty good. Like you go full circle back to it, but I like what you're saying. It's not that exciting. We did a oversewing at the internals of this school earlier this week. And what you're saying, another contractor, they're redoing the entire front of the school. So there's no access through the front. And the only way to get through is through one certain gate. And the carpet cleaner has got to come through the gate. And we're oversewing the internals. And we don't want anyone to drive on the lawn. And the only way for the carpet cleaner to get through to the carpets is to drive on the lawn that I'm oversewing. And I'm like, okay, fine. This might be some tire tracks I need to redo or whatever. But anyways, I'm totally with you on like certain jobs that seem attractive and like great, and then all of a sudden they become technical nightmares, and you go, man, I was going to charge X number of grand for this, and I thought I was going to make a huge amount, and nope, it's not how it works.
And I like doing a mixture of stuff personally. I did a lot of larger jobs. And then I had clients saying, "Well, I know you don't really do small stuff." And I said, "Oh, no, I do. I love doing small stuff as well. Like for me, it's finding that happy sort of mixture, I suppose. If you're just big job, big job, big job, big job, I find it burns me out too much. Whereas if I can do a large project and then come back and do a small little waterfall and then come back and do a little pond and then do a little, Japanese garden and then go and do another large project and then do one small one and then another large one, then I find I stay really refreshed and really sort of passionate and sharp and, everything else. Whereas if you're doing, really big projects all the time, I find it can start just, going, oh, I've been raking for days straight, or I've been seaming liner for, 10 hours. And and you can start losing a little bit of that, a little bit of that freshness, I suppose. So, I like doing small projects as well.
I also find that when you're working for somebody, now everything you do is going to be expensive. That's just how any sort of landscaping is, right? And ponds would be expensive and all that sort of stuff. But when you have the massive projects, right, then it's hard to quote them to start with. But even if you were quoting accurately, let's say the job costs you $100,000 and you think, that's a lot of money. I'm going to put 10 grand on top of it, and hopefully I'll make my 10 grand, right? Well, if you go to a job that costs you $2,000, you could put $2,000 on top of it, and probably most people wouldn't blink. And I don't know if these rates are equivalent to what you're talking about, but going from 2 to 4 grand doesn't feel like too much to somebody who's expecting a big price. But going from 110 to 115 or 120, it's like, oh. And then again, small things snowball and big projects, and all of a sudden it's all gone. So sometimes, what I'm getting at is $100,000 worth of small projects is probably more enjoyable, more profitable than one $100,000 project sometimes. And a lot of people don't realize that. They don't work that out until 3, 4, 5 years into business. Yeah. So,
and big projects equals big problems. So you might have a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 project, and something goes wrong, or something, when I say goes wrong, you can't get the materials you expected, or you needed to alter something, or your access got cut off, or something like that, and it costs you $1,000, and you go, well, that sucked, and you just keep moving. If you're doing a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 job, and something goes wrong, you're going, shit, that just cost me $50,000. And all of a sudden, excuse my language too.
It's fine. You're talking to mostly contractors here. People worry about swearing then,
yeah. So, what can be, something that you just didn't expect and unexpected on a $20,000 or $30,000 job, you just sort of move past and keep working. What can be an unexpected on a multiple hundreds of $1,000s project can quickly, go, oh, the business is going to, be in trouble if I don't get this sorted. So that's the risk when you're doing large projects. So you've really got to make sure that that you're going into it with the, understanding of what could and couldn't happen, and and are willing to sort of chat about that. And look, no risk, no reward, I suppose. But that can be an added stress. A stressor, obviously, on doing large projects, as well as trying to do the work and everything else. You're going, oh, geez, is this going to go well? Or, this timber I quoted for 19 mil, and I actually just noticed that it was supposed to be 32 mil on the plan, and now I can't go back and change it. So now I've got to just front, and pay an extra 10 grand worth of timber because I misread 19 mil decking instead of 32 mil decking, or it happens. So. It's,
mate, that's a bad mystery. That's a bad one. I had a conversation with a school. I had an interesting story this week. Maybe 6-7 months ago, I got a call from somebody who works at a school, who knows who we are, and they said, hey, look, there's this different school, so they're the groundskeeper there, and they go, there's this different school, third school, that needs help, and they've gotten a quote for some services, and could you just quickly give us a run over it, because we think it's too expensive.
Yeah. And
they sent it to me. I'm like, there is nothing wrong with that price, and it was for top dressing of a school.
Yeah.
And I said, like, if you were to, like, this is how much soil you need, if you were just to buy the soil from your local soil supplier at local soil supplier rates, it would be more expensive. We're talking $20,000 worth of soil because they wanted pure organic top dress over their entire school, massive ovals. And I was like, you're talking 20 grand in soil. Like, obviously, like, they've gone and got it from the supplier. They got a better price. And I'm just giving them pricing expectations. And I wasn't trying to quote them or anything like that. And it's a long way out of that area. And so anyway, so I was chatting with them. I just said, look, and I gave them some reality checks in a friendly way where I was like, to be honest, I wouldn't be doing this. If you've got 20 grand to invest, you should be doing this, that, whatever. Like, and for a school of this size, that is not a lot of money. You really should be budgeting. And I was just telling them how it was, like 100, 150 grand a year for all sorts of maintenance. You want to be using these types of mowers, and they're, 50 to 70 grand. And I just gave them a reality check because it was somebody who I liked. So basically, I had a good relationship with this groundskeeper at this different school. The third school has a good relationship with them, so we're in the middle and mutual trust. And I just said, look, do whatever you want with that information, And they have staff. They weren't looking for a contractor, all that sort of stuff. Anyways, I got an email from the school this week being like, can you come consult us because we don't know what we're doing. And I was like, yeah, cool, fine. But I think that that's a better way of going about it. Instead of going, let's try and work with what you've got. Like, sometimes I just need the reality check because when you try and work with what people got, that's when you get in trouble sometimes and you cut corners on this and that. And I did a lot early in business. I'm sure we all do. And you think you're being helpful to the client, and sometimes it works out and you are being helpful to the client. But then sometimes it doesn't work out on those big projects. You're in trouble. And I can imagine if I went and said, we'll do this top dressing job and we'll get some cheap stuff for you and we'll get it done and we'll do it for 15 grand or whatever. And I pocket the money and go away, and 3 months later it's not as good as they expected. What does that do for my reputation? Something goes wrong. Now I'm not making money and it's bad for my reputation and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reality of it is that people don't realize how much stuff costs. It's the materials alone can just can be astronomical on a decent sized project where you go, I've just all it is just a few garden beds, and you're like, well, I've just brought in 70 cube of soil to do it. So
which is what, 90 ton, 100 ton or something like that.
And then if you're buying something with organic in it and stuff like that, you're up around that sort of $100 a meter almost. It quickly adds up. Like it's and they go, well, what do you mean? I thought it would be $3 grand. Which look, and it's client education. It's education altogether. I've had some people come up to projects that I've done at nurseries. I did a project at Avalon Nursery as a display for the old owner, Dave, who's now got advanced trees. And we got along really well. And we just finished building this project, had a little Japanese sort of style garden around it, multiple falls, 7 by 7 or 6 or 7 by 4 meter pond, ecosystem pond with a pathway around it. And a bloke came up while we were building it and said, geez, boys, this looks fantastic. He said, it looks great. What would something like this set you back? A couple of grand, 2 or 3 grand? And like there's, there's 10 grand worth of aquascape gear in it, not including rock, not including labour, not including, hire, not including anything. Like it's, but they just genuinely don't know. And I try to have that conversation with clients really early. I try to have a chat about them, what we after, send me some photos of the space or tell me what sort of thing you're looking for. I'll give you a rough ballpark. So, okay, you're looking for a 7 by 5 meter recreation pond. They start at around $80,000 to $90,000. You're looking for a small pond. We can do something around that $12,000 mark. You want a little waterfall? We can start them at $8,000. There's options, but you let me know, what you're sort of after, and we can have a little conversation about rough ballpark costs. Now, maybe I say you want a recreation pond. They start at 80 or 90. But you might say, well, actually, I want it bigger and I want waterfalls and I want extra filtration. And then we'll have that conversation. Yeah. But where that starting point is then. And I'm not getting out there and going, oh, well, this, and selling you on a project that you're really excited about. And then I tell you it's going to be 150 and you say, well, I had 15, and so then everyone's disappointed. So I can bring them back to a $15,000 water feature, but I've just got them really excited about this $150,000 water feature. So now that they're looking at thinking about that, they're like, well, now I'm not excited about the $15,000 water feature anymore.
No,
Yeah.
no one's happy.
Yeah, so it's
exactly.
I find communicating and sort of setting the stage for what costs and timelines and communication and everything is really important from the get-go.
Yeah. The other day, like I said, when doing this oversowing, you just reminded me. I can't believe I forgot this. We've got to oversow with the ryegrass because it's coming to winter. The warm season grass doesn't handle getting trodden on by the kids. So we're oversowing a section. What we do is we go with a vertimower. We expose some soil so the ryegrass has something to touch and grow into. And so we're using our MoMaster vertimower, and anybody in the industry knows that they're expensive. And the one that we bought, we got it 5 years ago, but now brand new, they're about $10,000. Amazing machine. And so we're just running into it, and there's this guy who's dismantling some shade sails for over the playground, and he walks up to me, he goes, "Oh, that machine's amazing. I'd love to get one of these for home." And I look at him like, "For home?" And I thought he knew. The way he was acting, it was like he knew what he was looking at, right? So I was like, "Gee, man, you must be rolling in some money to get this for home for a once-a-year thing you might do." And I didn't word it that way, but I said, "Oh, you should, getting it for home." And he's like, "Yeah, how much do these cost?" And I was like, "Oh, they're like 10 grand." He goes, "How could something like this cost 10 grand?" So I was like, anyway, I just found it funny, but it happens. That's all the time, like I said, that school I was talking at, I was like, "Hey, look, the mower that we use to mow the schools that we do, if I was to buy it new now, it's $60,000 for a lawnmower." And people are like, "For a lawnmower?" And it's like, yeah, but you seem to like how we cut the other one. I don't know what I don't know what else to tell you. It's just I don't set the prices. If they were 15 grand, I'd be a lot happier too. But
Absolutely.
I'd
have a couple of them
for cheaper. Yeah, exactly. You'd be the same. If I could get the soil, if I could do this job for $3 grand, like the other guy was saying, I'd be doing it for $3 grand. It's not like I'm not the problem here, So that's business, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's frustrating when you put your heart and soul into something and somebody comes up to you and go, "What does that cost? $3 grand?" Oh my goodness,
Yeah, and I say to people all the time, I wish that I could just walk into everyone's backyard and say, "What would you like?" And they say, "We want this, 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 this." All right, how much money have you got? "I've got this." "Great, no worries." And just go and do it. And we make business margin. We make enough wages. We make payroll. We make everything else. I wish that was the case, but it's just unfortunately it's not. We've got to set expectations. We've got to set pricing, and that's just the way the world works. So, but I'd love to be able to do whatever anybody wanted for whatever price they could afford. I would love that. I just get to build cool projects all year round.
I don't think people. 99% of people. They don't know maybe not 99, but the vast majority of people, they don't do anything with business, as in like they've got no connection to what it's like running a business at all. Yeah. They're school teachers or whatever, physiotherapists, and they work for somebody else, and that's no criticism of them. They just don't know. They don't know what it costs. And so, and even a lot of people running a business, to be fair, they're not very good at working out what their costs are.
Yeah.
And, they don't realise that, for us, as a gardening business that does some maintenance, for me to send my guy to Bunnings is costing me in missed opportunity. If it takes him 20 minutes to go to Bunnings, he's 20 minutes at Bunnings, he's 20 minutes driving back, right? Well, typically speaking, we could do about $150 worth of work in that time. Yeah. So I've missed out on 100. I've got limited time in the day. I've missed out on that much money. And so when someone's like, "Oh, I'll just duck down to the shops and get us this thing," and it's like, well, we have to charge you that because it's going to the shops is no different than digging a hole or mowing the lawn. I still have to cover the wages, and And people just have no idea. They have no concept that just ducking down to Bunnings costs that much money in business.
Yeah.
And absolutely. You go, well, if I cut a corner on that one job, am I gonna lose my business? No. But if I got to do that all the time, it gets to a point where no, I can't run a successful business like that.
Yeah.
And and when you start talking, I'm talking about one thing from Bunnings. You're talking about 70 ton of soil. That's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's. But that's that's all part of business, really, isn't it? And I think that is the big reason that business owners tend to gravitate towards being friends with other business owners and talk to other business owners and everything else, because they're people that understand it. And it can be hard to find that sometimes, where you say something and people just don't grasp the concept of what you're talking about. So I think that's why people within the industry and people that own businesses tend to gravitate towards having friendships with other people that are in the same situation, because they you can whinge about something on a Friday afternoon and they understand exactly what you're talking about. So
yep. Yeah. What about this? Would you if you could encapsulate one thing? Let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, I'd love to do what Daniel's doing. I want to head down that path. If you were to talk to Daniel from 10 or 12 years ago when you started, on the business side, what's the number one thing you would say that would help you avoid some of the pains and pitfalls that you had early on in business? So speaking to yourself and then thus everybody listening who's interested in what you're doing, number one lesson on the business side of things.
Know your numbers. That's going to be the biggest thing that you can do in any business, is know your numbers. I still need to be better at it, but I know my numbers a heck of a lot better than I did 10 years ago. But I've still got a heck of a long way to go. But that would be my biggest piece of advice. Know your numbers. Don't shoot for a magical turnover number. Know your numbers. Know what you need to make. Know what you need to know when you're investing too much in machinery. Know when you're investing too much in staff. Know when you're not getting the right profit margins. Know when what your overheads are going to be, what your GST, your BAS is going to be. Know all this sort of stuff. Those numbers are going to, it's the difference between being like, oh well, he was a great pond builder or great whatever. Until he went out of business. There's no point being the best at what you do for 12 months or 18 months or 5 years or whatever, but not creating a sustainable model. And I've had this conversation with people recently. You aren't necessarily your own client, so you might say, well, I wouldn't buy something like that for $50,000. It's okay. Well, you're not selling to you. Yes. And if you can't buy something that you sell for $50,000, does that tell me that you're earning too much money, or does that tell me you're not probably earning enough money if you can't afford to buy your own product? People look at it and say, well, I can't charge that much because I couldn't afford it. Yeah. So, well, if you can't afford it, maybe you're not charging enough to be able to buy your own product. So that's sort of been my realization over the years. But you've got to earn that. You've got to earn that too. You can't just. That's not saying you just walk in and be like, well, I'm going to charge top dollar. You've got to have the skills and knowledge and experience and follow up and communication and everything else. Because I've seen some awful jobs for 80, 90 grand, and I've seen some brilliant jobs for 80, 90 grand. So it just, it doesn't mean that you know everything because you're charging that much. But I think you need to endeavor to find a price that makes you a sustainable business, that allows you to grow and allows you to invest back into your staff and yourself and your business and your partner and everything else, and then find how you create that quality and that value for money. Don't be cheap, be valuable.
Yes, and I also think that there's an element where you do the price expensive to help you make the quality. It's chicken and the egg. Because if you undercharge on the job, you have to rush on the job, right? Yep. If you don't know what you're doing and you overcharge, that's a problem too. But it's kind of like some people never get to the point of doing the most excellent work they could because they're always slightly undercharging. It's a very interesting tightrope to balance when you're first starting out in the industry, to have the ability to know what to charge, take the time and do it properly. I mean, I can imagine. I found it difficult with a simpler service. I can imagine all the complications and all the moving factors on what you're doing would be even more challenging.
Yeah, and we all pay to learn one way or another. Those losses on jobs, that sweat equity, those sleepless nights. Every business owner's had them, and you pay for your university degree one way or another. For owning a business and wanting to be a contractor or a business owner, you put a lot of sweat equity into it, and you put a lot of stress, and sometimes you lose money and everything else, and that's all part of that, growing and learning. But I suppose it's just important not to continue making the same mistakes. That's probably the biggest thing. But I 100% agree. You need to allow yourself the budget to create your best work. And that's not going to be for everyone. And I've had that conversation and I say, look, this is what I would do, but I want to build you the Maserati of ponds. Now, I'm not saying that we can't build you the Ford Ranger of ponds, and it will be lovely still, and you'll really enjoy it. But if you just said to me, what would you do, or what would you put in your backyard? Well, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to put extra filtration and extra jet lines, and some cool features, and a little stream here, and a bigger waterfall, and because that's how I think it would be best represented to my work. But I also understand that that doesn't necessarily align with everyone's budgets or anything like that too. So.
It would be reminiscent of me not to talk about the environment and all that sort of stuff, because I know that's something that's important to you. Is that a bit of a sort of personal, maybe not crusade, but is that a personal point of motivation for you to talk about or get people back to maybe more focus on the environment rather than maybe... what would you call it? Sort of geometric, aesthetic, four walls, apartment sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? But there's this. I think when I see your work, there's a passion about that. Am I right? Is that part of the meaning behind the work you do?
It is, but it's probably more organic. Like, I don't see myself, which is funny because I don't see myself as a hippy-dippy environmentalist kind of person. And then somebody will say, well, what rocks are you going to put there? And I say, well, I don't know. The rocks will sort of tell me where they want to go. And then I'm like, I am that person. Like, I just, but I think, it's in a more organic way. So, obviously I think we need to be conscious of what we're doing. I think we need to, I go a lot on feel. Sometimes I look at something and I just can feel that it's not right. So I need to make some changes. And and that's an aesthetic feel. And I'm not a designer by trade or anything like that, but I've got a certain aesthetic that people have come to appreciate, where I can see what aesthetically works for me and what feels good. It feels right to walk this way. It feels right to have that curve. It feels right to have that water doing this, and it feels right to, So I do work a lot on feelings, and it is an organic approach, which can be more difficult from a business perspective. But it is also, I think, a more naturally, ecosystem approach, and that's what I hope to achieve in the coming, years of business is create a business ecosystem where I have, things in the business and services in the business that self-support each other and help each thing grow, and that can sort of then create an ecosystem of nature build like what I build in people's backyards. And that's my sort of overall goal. But I just love, I love working with recycled timbers, and they've got a soul, they've got a feeling, they've got a story. There's just a certain, there's a certain aesthetic and a certain, feeling you get when I anyway look at a, beautiful rustic timber, and it's got some gnarly little burrs, and, it's got some history and some holes in it, and that's, to me, that's gorgeous. Whereas that just straight painted timber, it just does nothing for me. I just get no, it still takes skill to put it together and everything else, but to me, emotionally, it doesn't give me any sort of emotional benefit versus, and it's a bit the same, those natural rock work, natural aesthetic water features and stuff like that. It makes me happy, and that's why I build it. And my theory is, if I build something that makes me happy, to the best of my ability, it will make my clients happy.
Well, it sounds like you're, like if I was to give an analogy, you have like, say, a fast food chain, which every single meal is made in exactly the same way, and that's why it tastes exactly the same in Japan as it does in, America as it does in Australia, because, McDonald's is making their Big Mac the same way in every single way, shape or form. And then you have sort of the chef who, a sort of higher end restaurant, who is tasting it and adjusting the recipe as it goes, and the whatever dish he's making tonight is slightly different from the one from last night because maybe the herbs are a little bit different, or seasonality or whatever, and it's like you're making the same thing, but you're not making the same thing. Like at some point it's food that you put in your mouth, and it gives you some enjoyment with the taste and some nutrients, but they're not the same thing. And so when I hear that, I also think it must be very hard to hire people, Because how do you teach that? How do you say to somebody, here's how you sense things in the same way, like, you know, like here's how you listen to the rocks tell you where they go. It's like, that's not, I don't know. How do you teach that? Have you resigned yourself to the fact that, that's just going to be you and somebody else will do it their way? Or are you actually trying to teach that to people so that they can see the things that you see?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's a very accurate analogy because I'm actually a qualified chef as well. And
really?
it's one of the things that drives my partner insane is that she'll say, "Oh, I absolutely love that. What did you do?" And I was like, "I don't know. I made something nice."
It was 2 kilos of MSG. That fixes everything, right?
So I very much am like that in everything I do, where I just am driven by passion and feel and everything else. So, and as far as teaching people, look, some people get it more than others. You can sort of see, there's people that you go and get me a nice rock, and you go, geez, that is the ugliest rock. Like the only good place for that is buried. And then other people just have a natural aesthetic, and they know what looks good and how it should sit and everything else. But at the end of the day, I like working with people who are passionate and positive, and because the rest you can sort of teach to a certain degree. But it is hard. I had 7 guys. Trucks, excavators, everything else. And now I'm back down to 3. So, I'm on site full time again, well, just about full time again. And I'm much happier for it. I enjoy being on site. I love having that connection with my clients and with my projects and what I'm building. And I just don't think I'm meant to grow to a scale where it requires me to be off-site. And that can sometimes be, because everyone says, well, work on the business, not in the business and everything else. And I understand that. But I didn't start this to become a mega successful business owner. I started this business because I love what I do and I'm passionate about it. And I want to do it for as long as my body will let me. Now I've worked with some brilliant people along the way, and I had a foreman for 7 or 8 years who was great, and he's we're still close, but he's doing his own thing now, and I've sort of come back on the tools a lot more, and I've got a young guy who's been working with us for several years, and Gabriel, who's working with me, he's been on and off since he was 18, and he's 31 now. So he's he sort of went to Melbourne and then helped me on Keilor, and then came back with us for a year and 2 years, and then goes and does something else and did some plumbing, and came back with us again, and so but again, fantastic person to be around, good friend, good attitude, always happy, always passionate, and that to me is the most important thing. And then you can teach the rest to a certain extent.
I've been on a crusade recently to basically say what you're saying there, where people, they set out the best things about this industry are usually the visual satisfaction of making something beautiful, working outside, getting the fresh air, not being cooped up in an office job. And if you can have financial success with that whilst being on the tools, a lot of people, that would be their dream job. But then some of us, and I've been here, get sucked in by vanity numbers, wanting to get a certain number of employees. And one of the things I've been trying to talk a lot about lately is to say, do you know what, like, separate your idea of success with vanity numbers, because there's a different type of success, and a lot of people will miss the forest through the trees and get caught up on some sort of metric or whatever, going, I want to turn over X amount a year or do this or have this many employees. And a lot of people who try that go back in size and realize that actually, no, it's not. It's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. You can make better money. It's less stressful. They enjoy being on the tools. They sort of realize that, it's pretty good. There's a life there that's simpler and it's good. And there's a lot of people in the industry that I don't know what it is. Something on the internet teaches them bigger is better, but they get sucked in. And then you hear the stories like yours and they go, actually, no, that's not what I want.
And I think it depends on your version of success and your version of happiness. Like to some people, having a crew with 30 to 50 guys and running that and never having to touch a tool is the best idea that that would make them so happy. Whereas for a lot of us, it's the exact opposite of that. We do the business stuff because it's required, not because that's what we're passionate about. What we love doing is what we're doing when we are on site, or when we're talking to others in the industry, or we're seeing the expression on a client's face when they see the waterfalls running for the first time, or the messages that you get being like, oh my God, it's so nice, I'm sitting in my pond with the lights on, and everything else. Like that's the stuff that drives me. Not having 30 employees. I love having guys because I love having a crew of people, and it's fantastic. But I also love being on site. I love being involved with the business, and that's what I found. I found when I wasn't on site as much is that I found it really hard to find that happy medium between not micromanaging guys and. Yep. Or if I wasn't micromanaging guys, then feeling like I was just disconnected from the project altogether, and it was no longer my business, it was no longer my project, it was no longer my client, because it was just somebody else doing it. And I found that really hard to deal with. I either felt disconnected altogether, or I felt like I was micromanaging guys. So the only way that I could sort of get around that was to go back to basics and say, well, why did I get into this? Why did I start doing this? What did I love about it? And do that. And then at the end of the day, look, you can go broke trying to have 30 guys, or you can go broke doing it yourself. So do what you love, do what you love, do what you're passionate about. You can also
have some success, I guess. You know what I mean? No, I have to go broke.
You know what I mean, though. You go, well, like if it's going to succeed or fail, you go, well, there's always a risk that it fails, regardless of what you're doing. So I'd rather it fail doing exactly what I am passionate about and what I love, because that's always going to be a risk. And now if I can, be successful doing it exactly the way that I want to do it, that's even better, icing on the cake. It's fantastic. But I don't want to sacrifice what I love and what I'm passionate about just to see, oh, well, I've got more dollars in the bank, or I'm running a more financially viable or more financially, stable business, but I'm miserable because I'm never on site. I never see the projects. I don't feel like it's my business anymore. To me, that's just, you may as well go and work for someone else. So to me, that's what I'm talking about. Not sort of saying that you are going to go broke, but just saying that there's always going to be a risk involved of success, or success, risk, and failure. So I would rather put that on my back doing what I love, the way that I love to do it, and say, well, let's see how it goes. And I'm going to do everything I can to make this successful, doing it the way that I like doing it.
Well, mate, I reckon that's a beautiful way to finish the podcast. Having some perspective of what actual success is, and that vanity numbers are not the way to go. Do you know what's really interesting? The podcast we did before this, so the one that's going to come out before yours, is a guy who's running, and I love you both, but it's just different mentalities, because this is a guy who is running a massive section of gyms, and he's now going to expand it out to Florida. He's going to go to America and help gyms go over to America, and he's super driven, and that's what he's passionate about. But that doesn't mean that that's what's success. And then hearing you go, that's, for me, it's a completely different mindset. And I love that, because I people who know my story, I got sick 5 years ago. I haven't worked full-time in the industry since. Yeah. And I actually do miss working on the tools. There is a satisfaction to that I think is underrated in the industry. And that's one of the reasons why I'm on a little bit of a crusade to help people have a maybe a more holistic perspective on success. Because if you can make really good money solo, or maybe with an offsider or two or three, and stay on the tools and stay connected to doing this great physical work, and literally, in all of our cases in this industry, we are literally making the world a more beautiful place. Maybe it's one backyard at a time, and maybe, we need some help, because there's quite a lot of ugly places that could do with some nice ponds. But there's a satisfaction to that that's completely underrated, and I really appreciate your perspective. So, mate, thank you for coming on. Where do people find you?
Instagram, NatureBuild Insta. Facebook is NatureBuild AU, I believe. But yeah, NatureBuild Australia, www.naturebuild.com.au. We're on pretty much all the social media platforms. Instagram and Facebook I probably use the most. But yeah, website's great to look at, and Facebook and Instagram probably stay updated the most.
Awesome, mate. Well, everybody jump on Instagram, send them a message and say, yeah, that pond's pretty good. What does it cost? $2 to $3 grand? Something like that. You know? Can you imagine if your comments just get swamped by that? People think it's legit. Anyways, I just sent him a personal message. Be funny like that or something like that. But, you know, say you listen to the podcast, you really appreciated it. And, yeah, jump on it. Everybody else, we will see you in the next podcast.